Her hand froze halfway to the coffee pot when the laughter started. It wasn't the kind of laughter that warmed a room. It was sharp, careless, the kind of sound that made walls close in. Two men at the counter sat with their elbows spread wide, whispering something to each other, but their eyes were fixed on her, fixed on the jagged scars that ran down her arm like rivers of fire turned to stone. And then they laughed louder. No one told them to stop. No one turned their head. In that diner full of strangers, forks kept scraping plates, mugs clinked against counters, and her scars were left hanging in the air like a cruel joke. But didn't flinch. She was not the kind of woman who explained herself to the world. She had learned long ago that people rarely cared for the truth when a lie was easier to swallow. She wore simple clothes. She tied her hair back without care. She spoke little. And when she moved, she did it quietly, as though any sudden gesture might wake the ghosts that followed her. Still, the laughter burned. One of the men at the counter leaned in closer to his friend, said something under his breath, then lifted his arm in an exaggerated motion, mocking the way her hand moved when she poured coffee. The other man chuckled. The sound echoed across the chrome and glass of the diner. Her knuckles tightened around the pot. The smell of roasted beans rose around her, but beneath it she smelled something else. A memory, the metallic tang of blood, the thick smoke of burning fabric, the weight of dust in her throat. She blinked hard. The diner swam back into focus. No, not here, not now. The world didn't need her stories. The world only saw her scars. She turned toward another table, pretending not to hear, pretending not to feel the familiar ache in her chest that came whenever strangers stared too long. She had grown used to it, being looked at without really being seen. But silence had become her armor. And still, even armor grows heavy. The men's laughter grew louder. A couple of others at the bar joined in, chuckling quietly into their sleeves. They weren't laughing because they understood. They were laughing because it was easy, because cruelty required less effort than kindness. Steadied her breathing. She had stood in worse places than this. Places where silence was dangerous, where shadows hid snipers, where mortars screamed overhead and the ground itself shook. She had felt her skin burn, her bones grind, her lungs seize with smoke. Compared to that, this should have been nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a reminder. Her scars weren't accidents. They weren't clumsy mistakes or careless choices. They were carved into her by fire, by shrapnel, by war. Years ago, she had been a combat medic. She had carried lives in her arms, pressed her hands into wounds that screamed against her fingers, dragged broken men across open ground while the air was shredded by lead. She remembered one night. Mortars raining down, the world torn apart in flashes of light and dirt, a soldier screaming for his mother in the dark. She found him half buried, blood soaking through his chest. She didn't think. She just grabbed him, pulled with everything she had. Her uniform burned against her skin when the fire came. Her arm seared until she thought she would never move it again. But she kept pulling. And when she reached cover, when she pressed her hand against his wound, when she felt the faint rhythm of life return beneath her palm, she didn't tell him her name. She never did. All he saw was the faint call sign painted on her vest. Angel. That was what they called her. Not medic, not soldier, just Angel. And somehow that had been enough. Her lips pressed together now as she poured coffee for another customer, ignoring the laughter still biting at her ears. No one in this diner knew the weight of those scars. No one here had seen the nights when she woke with her sheets twisted, hearing again the cries of men who never came home. No one had been there when she crouched in the dust, pressing down on a wound that was bigger than her hands, whispering lies like, "You're going to make it. You're fine. Just breathe." She lost count of how many times those lies turned into silence. Her arm throbbed faintly as she set the pot back on the burner. The scars always felt heavier when people stared. But she had learned. Some battles were fought by standing tall, some were fought by staying silent. And then the door opened. The room shifted. A tall man stepped in, his uniform pressed, metals catching the morning light like stars cut from steel. He carried the kind of stillness that only came from years of walking battlefields. His eyes swept the diner once, pausing only when they found her. And then they softened. He walked straight to the counter, his boots measured, his shoulders squared. He stopped between and the men who had been laughing. No one breathed. The diner's hum faltered into silence. Even the coffee pot seemed to hold its hiss. The general's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. The kind of voice that cut through chaos, that made men obey without thought. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said, his gaze fixed on her. His tone dropped into something almost fragile. "Angel, is that you?" The men's smirks cracked. The air thickened. Lips parted, but no sound came. It had been years since anyone had called her that. Years since anyone had looked at her scars and seen not disfigurement, but proof. Proof of who she had been. The general turned slowly toward the crowd, his words sharp as steel. "This woman carried wounded men under fire while the rest of us prayed for cover. You're alive today because of people like her, and you laugh at her scars." Silence dropped like a stone. The men who mocked her lowered their eyes, their shoulders bent beneath the sudden weight of shame. Around the diner, heads bowed. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. Her scars weren't ugly. They were metals written into flesh. Didn't need to speak. She simply stood a little taller. The general gave her a small nod, a gesture heavy with everything that didn't need to be said. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. For years she had carried silence like a shield. But now, for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt strong. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that stays silent until the right person speaks. The general left the diner, his boots steady, his shoulders still squared. Every head followed him as he walked out, and when their eyes returned to her, they were different, softer, heavier with respect. The men at the counter muttered an apology, didn't turn toward them. She simply picked up the pot again and poured the next cup. She didn't need their words. She had already won. And yet, as she moved through the diner, her heart beat differently, stronger, uneasy, because the general's voice had carried not just recognition but something else, a shadow, a reminder of a life she thought she had left behind, a life that still waited for her in silence. But there was something she hadn't told them, not the men at the counter, not the people in the diner, not even the general who had just called her by the name she thought she'd buried. She hadn't told them why she left. And she hadn't told them what still haunted her every night. Not yet. Why couldn't she shake his voice? The general's words still echoed hours later, long after the diner closed and the chairs were turned upside down on tables. Sat in the dim light of her small apartment, a cup of untouched tea cooling between her hands. "Angel, is that you?" Her chest tightened every time she replayed it. She hadn't heard that call sign in years. She thought she'd buried it with the uniform folded away in her closet, sealed in a box she never dared open. But the moment he said it, the memories came rushing back. The sand, the heat, the metallic smell of blood. And the faces, always the faces. She pressed her palms into her eyes, but it didn't stop them. There was a night she never spoke of, not to anyone, not even to herself when the silence stretched too long. A night when everything changed. It had started the way most missions did, quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that sat heavy on the chest, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Had been crouched in the back of an armored transport, her med kit strapped tight, listening to the radio chatter as their convoy pushed deeper into hostile territory. She remembered the way Private sat across from her, too young, too thin, his hands trembling against his rifle. He had looked at her once, trying to smile. She forced one back, even though she could see in his eyes he didn't believe it. The lieutenant's voice cut through the static. "Eyes up, we're close." And then the world exploded. The first IED hit the lead vehicle. The blast tore through metal and flesh alike, the shockwave slamming into her chest. The transport bucked hard, throwing her sideways. Her ears rang, her teeth rattled. By the time she scrambled upright, the air was thick with dust and screams. "Medevac, medic up, medic up." The words yanked her forward before her mind caught up. She leapt from the transport, hitting the dirt hard, her boots skidding as she ran toward the wreckage. Flames curled from the twisted metal of the lead truck. She didn't think. She just moved. Her body remembered what her mind couldn't process. Bandage here, pressure there, tourniquet now. His face appeared again, but this time it was pale. Blood soaked through his uniform where shrapnel had sliced deep. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps, his eyes wide with terror. I can't," his voice broke. "You can," she lied, pressing her hand against the wound, feeling the heat of life slipping away. Stay with me, stay with me." Mortars screamed overhead. Dirt rained down. She pressed harder, harder. His hand clawed at hers, desperate, small. He was 19. "Tell my mom." The rest never came. Her breath caught. Even now, years later, her body remembered the exact moment when his chest stilled, when the fight slipped from his eyes, when she realized the boy who had tried to smile at her hours before would never see another sunrise. She had kept moving that night. She had saved others, pulled 3 more from the wreckage, dragged a man twice her size across open ground, stitched wounds in the dark while the world burned around her. But's face never left her. It haunted her every time she closed her eyes. And it was that night, the night of fire and blood, that burned her scars into her skin. A second blast had caught her as she shielded another soldier, her arm lit with searing pain as fire wrapped around her. She thought it would never heal. In some ways, it never had. Lifted her sleeve now, staring at the jagged marks. The laughter in the diner had stung because it touched something deeper, something she carried like a brand. But the general's voice, that had cut even deeper. Because if he remembered her, if he still knew her as Angel, then the past wasn't as buried as she thought. Her tea had gone cold. She pushed it aside and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant echo of cars outside. Her apartment was small, quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet where memories crept in. She leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes. The general had looked at her with recognition, respect, but also something else, a shadow. And she knew what it meant. The military didn't call people back just to honor them. Not generals, not in that tone, not with that look. It meant something was coming. Something she wasn't ready for. She rose slowly, walked to the closet and pulled down the box she hadn't opened in years. Her fingers lingered on the tape before she tore it back. Inside lay her uniform, neatly folded, the faded fabric stiff with memory. Her vest was there too, and faintly, still visible beneath the dust, the call sign painted across it. Angel. Her throat tightened. She touched the letters with the tips of her fingers. Once it had been a name whispered with hope. Men bleeding out in the sand had reached for her, calling that word like it was the only thing tethering them to life. But to her, it was a reminder of everyone she saved, and everyone she didn't. She sank onto the floor, the box open before her, the ghosts rising from it like smoke. She didn't notice how much time passed before her phone buzzed. The sound made her jump. She picked it up, her heart stalling when she saw the name on the screen. General. Her hands trembled. She hadn't spoken to him in years. For a long moment, she let it ring. But finally, she pressed accept. His voice came through, steady, commanding, but softened at the edges. I didn't mean to startle you today, but I had to make sure it really was you. She swallowed. You shouldn't have said anything. Maybe not, but the truth has a way of breaking through silence. A pause. You know why I'm calling." Her stomach turned. No. Yes. The silence between them stretched. She could hear her own heartbeat. He said finally, "There's something coming, something only you can help with. I need Angel again." Her breath caught. No, she had left that world behind, buried it. But now the past was reaching for her again. And this time, she wasn't sure she could refuse. How many times could a life be lived? Asked herself that as she lay awake the night after's call, staring at the ceiling where shadows stretched long across the plaster. Her body was still, but her mind was a battlefield. Once she had lived as a soldier. Then she lived again as a medic. Later she lived as something less definable, broken, half-buried in silence. Now the general's words threatened to pull her into yet another life. "I need Angel again." Her throat tightened every time she replayed it. She turned onto her side, her scars catching the faint glow from the streetlight through the blinds. She pressed her arm against the sheets, as though the weight of the fabric could erase them. But the marks never left. They were carved too deep. Sleep refused her. When her eyes finally closed, the dreams came, not gentle ones. She was back there, dust choking the air, the ground trembling beneath mortar fire, a man's voice screaming, torn and raw. She was running toward him, hands outstretched, med kit slamming against her side. She pressed her palms against a wound that was too wide, too deep. The blood was hot against her skin. His lips moved. "Angel." The word faded into silence. His chest stopped rising. And she woke with a gasp, her sheets twisted around her legs, her skin damp with sweat. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand. She reached for it anyway, her hand hovering then retreating. She couldn't call him back. She wouldn't. But she knew silence was only a temporary refuge. By morning, she tried to bury herself in routine. She scrubbed the diner counters harder than necessary, poured coffee for strangers who didn't care about her name, and forced a smile when regulars shuffled in. But beneath it all, her chest was tight. Because she knew it wasn't over. And she was right. When the bell above the door jingled that afternoon, her body stiffened before she even looked up. She knew it was him. She knew by the stillness that entered with him, by the way conversations faltered mid-sentence. General stood there, not in pressed dress uniform this time, but in something simpler, fatigues worn and scuffed by use, his shoulders carrying the weight of too many battles. Her lips pressed tight. "You shouldn't be here." He moved closer, his step steady. "And yet here I am." Turned away, wiping a spotless counter. "Whatever you want, the answer is no." "Don't be so sure." She set the rag down harder than she meant to. "I left for a reason." "I know," he said quietly. His tone softened, almost breaking the armor of command. "But the world doesn't always let us leave for good." She turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "I gave everything, my arm, my sleep, my friends. You want to ask for more?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, steady, but urgent. "There's something happening, something that will cost lives if the right people don't step in. And the truth is, there aren't many left like you." She shook her head. "I'm not that person anymore." His gaze dropped briefly to her scars. "You think that makes you less? It doesn't. It makes you the one I can trust when everything else falls apart." Her breath caught. For a long moment the diner felt too small, too loud with silence. Then she whispered, "Why me?" Looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. "Because you've already proven you'll run toward the fire when everyone else runs away." Her chest tightened. She wanted to shout at him, tell him he was wrong, that she had nothing left to give, that she had broken in ways no one could see. But instead, she turned away. Her silence was the only weapon she had left. Leaned closer, his voice lower, almost gentle. "I'm not asking you to save the world, just to save the ones you can." She gripped the counter until her knuckles ached. His words sliced too close to the truth she carried. The truth of every soldier whose life she held in her hands, of everyone she couldn't save. The ghost pressed closer. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let him see. Finally, she forced the words out. "I can't go back." Silence lingered for a long, weighted moment. Then he nodded once, slow. "I won't push you, not today." He slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. "But if you change your mind, you'll know where to find me." And with that, he turned and left, the bell jingling softly in his wake. The paper sat between them, heavy as stone. She didn't touch it, not at first. But all night as she worked, as she moved between tables, as she poured coffee with practiced silence, her eyes kept drifting back. It was late, long after the last customer had gone, when she finally picked it up. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Coordinates, a time, nothing more. Her chest tightened. She crumpled it in her fist, fighting the urge to throw it away, but instead she slipped it into her pocket. She hated herself for it. Because she already knew her silence wasn't going to save her this time. Something was pulling her back. Something she couldn't outrun. What would happen if she ignored it? That question haunted her every hour since the general left the paper on the counter. She carried it in her pocket, crumpled, unreadable to anyone else, but burning against her like a live coal. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she would throw it away. But every time her hand brushed against it, she couldn't let go. At night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at it under the weak glow of the lamp. She thought about matches, about watching it burn into ash, but something in her chest kept stopping her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the nagging ache that she hadn't felt in years, the ache that whispered she still had something left to give. But every time she tried to believe that, his face appeared. 19, too young, too afraid. His last words clawed at her. "Tell my mom." The silence after pressed her forehead into her hands, her scars prickling as though the memory had weight. She wanted to live quietly, to fade into the kind of anonymity where no one asked, no one laughed, no one stared. She wanted peace. But peace was a stranger who never stayed long. The diner proved it. The laughter, the mockery, the sudden weight of his voice calling her by the name she thought she buried, Angel. She dragged herself out of the chair, restless. The apartment walls felt too close. She pulled on her jacket and walked the streets, hands shoved in her pockets, head low. The city hummed around her, cars, neon lights, people lost in their own lives. No one knew who she was. No one cared. But the silence inside her was louder than the noise outside. Her feet carried her to the river without thought. She leaned against the railing, staring at the black water moving slow beneath the bridge. She remembered another river, not here, not home. Far away, where sand stretched for miles and water was rationed like treasure. She remembered dragging a man through the dust, his weight pulling at her, his voice a hoarse whisper against the roar of gunfire. She had gotten him across, but not whole, never whole. The memory made her chest ache. She turned away, pushing back against it. But the ache followed her home, into her sleep, into her dreams. By morning, she was exhausted. She tried to bury herself in routine again. Coffee, tables, dishes, smiles that never touched her eyes. But the regulars noticed. The old couple who always ordered tea whispered to each other, glancing at her with something like concern. The trucker who came in at midnight asked if she was all right. She forced a smile, lied, and kept moving. But her silence wasn't fooling anyone anymore. It wasn't fooling herself. That night she unfolded the paper again. Coordinates, a time. Her hands trembled as she traced the numbers. Why these numbers? Why her? Hadn't told her, he hadn't needed to. His voice had carried enough urgency that she knew something mattered, something bigger than her. She hated herself for it, but she packed a small bag. Not much, just enough. Boots she hadn't worn in years, a jacket heavy enough for the night, And finally, after hours of packing, she opened the closet and pulled the old vest from the box. Her fingers lingered on the faded letters. Angel. She almost left it, almost shoved it back into the dark where it belonged. But at the last moment, she folded it carefully and placed it in the bag. Just in case. The next morning, she locked the diner behind her and told the manager she needed a few days. He didn't ask questions. He could see it in her eyes, the look of someone already gone. She drove until the city disappeared, until the roads grew quiet and the horizon stretched wide. The coordinates pulled her farther than she expected. Hours later, she reached it. An abandoned airstrip. The wind carried dust across cracked pavement. The hangar stood like hollow bones against the sky, and at the center, a lone figure waited. Yes. She stepped from the car, her bag slung over her shoulder. You knew I'd come. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. I hoped. She walked closer, her boots crunching against gravel. This doesn't mean anything. I'm just here to listen. That's all I ask. The silence stretched between them as she drew near. The wind tugged at her jacket, the vast emptiness of the strip pressing against her. Finally spoke. There's a mission, not combat, not like before, but dangerous in ways that require someone who won't break under pressure, someone who knows what it means to carry lives in their hands. Her stomach twisted. Why me? Because you've already proven you can walk through fire and come out carrying someone else. His eyes dropped briefly to her arm. Because scars don't weaken you, they prove you didn't stop. She looked away, jaw tight. You don't know what I lost. I do, he said softly. I lost them too. Her throat closed. She wanted to hate him for saying it, but his voice carried the weight of truth. He had been there. Different battles, same ghosts. She drew a shaky breath. What's the mission? He paused, his gaze steady, unflinching. Extraction. A field operative is trapped, injured. If we don't reach her, she won't survive. And if she doesn't survive, a lot more will fall with her. Froze. Her chest tightened, memory clashing with present. An injured soldier, a ticking clock, lives depending on whether she moved. It was everything she swore she left behind. But it was also everything that once gave her meaning. Stepped closer, his voice low. I'm not asking you to fight, just to do what you've always done, keep someone alive. Her hand curled around the strap of her bag. She wanted to say no, to walk away, to leave him standing in the dust. But instead, silence stretched between them. And finally she whispered, when do we leave? Shoulders eased just slightly. Tomorrow. The weight of it settled over her, heavy and inescapable. She was stepping back into a world she swore she'd buried. Back into fire. Back into scars. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the ghosts, a flicker stirred. Not pride, not strength, something quieter. Purpose. What did it mean to come back from the dead? That was the question carried as she stood at the edge of the hangar the next morning, the sun rising pale against the horizon. Her bag hung heavy on her shoulder, her boots digging into the dirt. Inside, her chest felt hollow. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing the quiet hum of activity inside. A small team moved with precise efficiency, checking gear, loading packs, reviewing maps spread across a folding table. They looked up when she entered. Their eyes told her everything. Curiosity, doubt, a trace of suspicion. None of them knew her. None of them saw Angel. All they saw was a woman with faded scars and a silence that pressed too heavy. Stood at the center, his voice steady as he gave orders. When he noticed her, he nodded once. You're here. She returned the nod, her throat tight. I said I'd listen. You'll do more than that. He gestured toward the team. This is who we've got, small, tight, off the books. That's the only way this works. His eyes moved across them. A tall man in his 30s, shoulders broad, the kind of stance that said he'd seen combat but carried it like armor. A woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back, her movements precise as she checked her weapon. And a younger man, barely older than had been, his fingers trembling as he tightened straps on his vest. Her stomach twisted. The ghosts pressed closer. "Names don't matter here," said. "What matters is trust." The tall man gave her a once-over, his expression unreadable. "She doesn't look like she's been out in years." The words cut sharper than she expected, but she didn't flinch. "I haven't," she said simply. The woman tilted her head, studying with something like calculation. "Then why now?" His lips pressed together. She didn't answer. "Cut in because when things go wrong, and they will, I need someone who doesn't break." His gaze locked on, and she doesn't. The tall man grunted but said nothing more. The woman looked away, though her silence spoke louder than words. The younger soldier's eyes lingered on, nervous, searching. He looked like he wanted to ask something but couldn't find the courage. Looked away before he could. She didn't want to see another 19-year-old staring at her with questions she couldn't answer. Instead, she set her bag down, unzipped it, and pulled out the vest. The room seemed to hold its breath. The faded fabric, the edges, the call sign painted faintly across it. Angel. The younger soldier's eyes widened. Even the tall man shifted slightly, though he hid it behind a hard stare. Slipped it on. The weight was familiar, unwelcome but grounding. Her scars prickled against it, but for the first time in years, she felt steady beneath its burden. "All right," she said quietly. "What's the plan?" Spread the map across the table. His finger traced the line of a mountain ridge, the coordinates marked in red. "Here, our operative is trapped near an old outpost. Injured, limited supplies, she won't last long." "How bad?" asked. "Radio contact broke 12 hours ago. We know she was bleeding, but not much else." His chest tightened. The silence of a broken signal was a familiar ache. She forced herself to focus. "And the terrain?" "Unforgiving," said simply. "No vehicles, too exposed. We go in on foot." The tall man frowned. "Extraction under those conditions is suicide." "Not suicide," corrected. "Difficult, which is why I called her." His eyes flicked too. She felt the weight of it, the unspoken truth. This wasn't about trust, it was about survival. And somehow, they thought she was the answer. The team moved into preparation. Weapons checked, packs adjusted, boots laced, moved among them quietly, her hands tracing gear she hadn't touched in years. Her fingers remembered what her mind had buried, checking straps, securing bandages, balancing weight. The younger soldier struggled with his pack, his hands clumsy. Watched him for a moment, the memory of pressing sharp against her. She almost turned away, almost let him figure it out himself. But something inside her stopped her. She stepped closer, her voice low. "You'll throw your back out if you carry it like that." He looked up startled. "Sorry, Don't apologize," she said quietly. Her hands adjusted the straps, pulling them tight, redistributing the weight. "Like this, the pressure goes here. You'll last longer." He nodded quickly, relief in his eyes. "Thank you." She forced a small smile, brief and fragile. "Stay steady, that's half the battle." As she stepped back, she caught watching her. His expression unreadable, but his eyes carried something close to approval. The preparation stretched into hours. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifting across the hangar floor. Finally, gathered them near the transport waiting at the edge of the strip. "This isn't a mission for glory," he said. "It's survival, hers and ours. You all know what's at stake." His gaze swept the group before settling on. "And you know who you're walking with." The silence was heavy. The tall man adjusted his rifle but said nothing. The woman gave a small nod. The younger soldier swallowed hard. Stood still, her scars burning beneath the weight of the vest. She felt exposed, fragile, but also alive. The hum of the transport engines filled the air. The wind carried dust across the strip. His voice cut through it, steady, commanding. "We move at dawn." That night sat alone on the edge of her bunk in the dim barracks. The others slept or pretended to. She stared at her hands, the scars running down her arm catching the faint light. She thought of the operative trapped in the mountains, alone, bleeding, waiting for help that might never come. And she thought of herself, years ago in the sand, dragging men through fire, whispering lies of survival. Her chest ached. She whispered to the dark, words meant for no one, "Don't let me fail again." The silence didn't answer, but somehow it felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. How long had it been since she felt this weight? The straps of the pack dug into her shoulders as the team moved at dawn, the sky barely touched with light. The air was cold, thin, the mountains looming ahead like silent sentinels. Every step crunched against gravel and dirt, echoing louder than it should have in the quiet. Kept her head down, her breath steady. She told herself it was just walking, just one foot in front of the other, but her body knew better. Her body remembered. The rhythm of boots moving together, the smell of oil on weapons, the silence heavy with what might be waiting in the hills. Her scars prickled beneath the vest. Led at the front, his frame steady, his stride unbroken. The tall man followed, rifle slung across his chest, his eyes sweeping the ridges with sharp distrust. The woman walked behind him, precise and watchful. The youngest soldier brought up the rear, his steps uneven, his breathing too quick. Stayed in the middle. She wasn't sure if placed her there for protection or because he knew that was where she could see everything, where she would be forced to notice. Every sound gnawed at her. A stone skittering down the slope, the whisper of wind across the rocks. Her chest tightened with every echo, memories pressing hard. She had walked paths like this before, and she knew how quickly silence could break. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, heat baking the earth beneath them. Sweat slicked her back, her throat dry despite careful sips from her canteen. No one spoke. The mission didn't allow for wasted words. But silence wasn't empty. Silence was alive. The tall man's gaze kept flicking back at her, measuring, judging. The younger soldier tripped once, catching himself on a rock, his face flushing with shame. The woman adjusted her pack with movements that looked too calm, too deliberate. And kept seeing's face in the boys, too young, too fragile. Her chest ached. "Eyes up," murmured from the front, his voice steady but sharp. His gaze snapped forward. The ridge above them looked still, too still. She slowed her breathing, letting her body slip into an old rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Awareness. Listening. Reading the land as though it carried a pulse. Something shifted, a flicker of movement. Her gut tightened. "Contact," the tall man whispered. "Not yet," replied, but his hand rested on his weapon now. The silence stretched taut, a thread ready to snap. Then, a crack sharp. The bullet struck rock inches from the tall man's boot, sparking dust. Another followed, slicing air. Down barked. The team dropped behind scattered boulders, the mountains erupting with fire. The air filled with the scream of rounds ricocheting, stones shattering. The younger soldier froze, his eyes wide, his chest heaving. His body moved before thought. She grabbed him by the collar, yanking him down behind cover. His breath came fast, ragged, panic written across his face. "Breathe," she snapped, her voice low but fierce. "Focus, stay small, you're fine." Her hands pressed against his back, steadying him as the fire raged overhead. She could feel his trembling, could hear his gasps, and for a split second, his ghost overlapped with him. 19, terrified, slipping away. "Not this time." "Eyes on me," she whispered, forcing his gaze to hers. "Stay with me, do you hear me?" He nodded quickly, his breaths evening out just enough. Bullets tore the ground, shouts echoed from the ridge above. His mind raced. Whoever was firing wasn't close, high ground, pinned position. They weren't aiming to wipe them out, not yet. They were testing, hurting. She scanned their cover, too thin, too exposed, they couldn't stay. His voice cut through the chaos. "We push left, break their line of sight." The tall man growled, "We won't make it." "We will," snapped. His eyes flicked to, "Angel, can you move him?" Her chest clenched at the word. Angel. She hadn't heard it in battle in years, but something in her spine straightened. "Yes." The younger soldier's eyes widened at the call sign, but before he could speak, gripped his vest. "Stay low, move when I move." When the next volley paused, she shoved him forward, keeping her body shielded against his. They sprinted between rocks, dust kicking up around their boots, bullets slicing air too close. Her heart pounded, but her body remembered angles, timing, cover. They dove behind a larger boulder, pressed him flat against the stone, her hand firm on his chest. His breath came quick, but he was alive. The others followed, moving in bursts. The tall man cursed under his breath as a round clipped the edge of his pack. The woman covered their flank with sharp, precise fire. Moved last, his calm steady even under the storm. They regrouped, panting, sweat streaking dirt across their faces. "Options," the tall man snapped. "Too many shooters up there," the woman replied. "They've got the ridge locked." His eyes shifted too. Not as a commander giving orders, but as a man asking a question he already knew the answer to. Her throat tightened. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't asked for it, but the truth pressed sharp against her. "We keep moving left," she said. "The rocks get denser. They'll lose line of sight, but we have to move fast." The tall man scowled. "And if you're wrong?" Met his gaze, her voice steady. "Then none of us make it anyway." The silence was brief, heavy, then nodded. "You heard her move." They pushed. The ground sloped, jagged stone shielding them more with every step. The fire above grew wilder, frustrated, scattered. Kept the boy close, her body between him and the ridge, her scars burning with every movement. Finally, the gunfire thinned. Shouts echoed faintly, but distance grew between them. The team collapsed behind a line of boulders, breaths heavy, bodies slick with sweat. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't fear now. It was survival. The younger soldier looked at, his voice shaking. "You saved me." She shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." But when she looked away, her hands trembled. Because for the first time in years, she had run toward the fire again. And she hadn't broken. Night fell heavy. The team camped in silence, the fire small, their voices hushed. The tall man sat apart, sharpening his knife. The woman cleaned her weapon with methodical care. The boy stared into the flames, lost in thought. Sat alone, her vest beside her, her scars aching with memory. She could still hear the bullets cracking against stone, still feel the boy trembling beneath her hands. Sat down beside her. For a while neither spoke. Finally he said, "You didn't freeze." She laughed once hollow. "I thought I would." "You didn't." Her hands tightened. "I can't do this again. I can't lose another one." His voice softened, rough at the edges. "You won't, not while I'm here." She wanted to believe him. But in the silence of the mountains, she knew the ghost still waited. And she knew the hardest part hadn't even begun. What did survival look like when hope was already fading? That question echoed in his chest as the team pushed through the mountains the next day. The air grew thinner, the paths narrower, the rocks sharper beneath their boots. They moved in silence, every step measured, every shadow checked twice. Hours bled together. Sweat streaked dirt across their faces, lips cracked, lungs burned. But none of them slowed. The coordinates were close now. Too close. Felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the weight of silence pressing heavier. And then the outpost. It was little more than a skeleton of stone and rust, a crumbling building clinging to the ridge. Its walls were with bullet holes, its roof half collapsed. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But inside, someone waited, someone bleeding, someone counting the hours like grains of sand. Raised his fist, signaling a halt. The team crouched low, eyes scanning, breaths held. No movement, no sound. Could be a trap, the tall man muttered. Or just death waiting, the woman replied. His heart pounded. She gripped her pack, her body remembering too much. She had walked into ruins like this before, and every time the silence lied. But there was no choice. Moved first, his steps slow, deliberate. The team followed, weapons ready, breath sharp. The door groaned when he pushed it open, dust billowing out like smoke. Inside, the air was heavy, dark. The walls smelled of rust and blood. And then a sound, faint, weak. A cough. Froze, her chest tightened. Moved toward it, over here. In the far corner, half hidden beneath debris, a figure lay still. A woman. Her uniform torn, her face pale, her breath shallow. Blood darkened the ground beneath her side. His world narrowed. The ghost pressed close, his face flickering in the shadows. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the woman coughed again, weaker this time. Ant's body remembered. She dropped beside her med kit already open, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Stay with me, she murmured, her voice low, almost a prayer. You're not done yet. The operative's eyes flickered open, glassy, unfocused. She whispered something too soft to hear. Don't talk, said, pressing gauze against the wound, her fingers moving fast. Save your strength. The tall man crouched nearby, scanning the room. How bad? Bad, muttered, but not gone. Her hands worked with ruthless precision. Bandage here, pressure there, tourniquet tight. She heard the woman's ragged breaths, felt the faint rhythm of life struggling beneath her palms. Her scars burned with every movement. His voice whispered in memory, tell my mom. She forced it back, her jaw tight. Not this time. Talk to me, she said softly to the operative, her voice steady. Tell me something, anything. The woman's lips trembled, cold. Good, said quickly. That means you're alive, stay alive, that's all you have to do. The woman's eyes fluttered, pressed harder, her own breath ragged. She felt his presence behind her, steady, silent, watching, trusting. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat beaded his forehead, the others shifted, restless, tense. Finally the bleeding slowed, the bandages held. The pulse beneath his fingers steadied, faint but real. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She'll make it, she whispered. The tension broke just slightly. The tall man muttered something under his breath, relief hidden in his tone. The younger soldier exhaled shakily, his eyes wide with awe. Sat back, her hands shaking now that they were free. She stared at the woman on the ground, pale but breathing, and something inside her cracked open. Because this was what she had always done. Kept someone alive. Even when it broke her. Crouched beside her, his voice low, Angel. She flinched at the name, but he said it not as a command, not as a reminder, only as a recognition. You still have it, he said. Her throat tightened. At what cost? He didn't answer. Because they both knew the cost. The operative stirred faintly, her lips moving again, leaned closer. This time the word was clear, Angel. His chest ached, her scars burned. She wanted to deny it, to push it away, but the truth pressed sharp against her. She hadn't come here to fight. She hadn't come here for recognition. She had come because, in some small way, she still believed lives were worth carrying. Even when the weight was unbearable. She adjusted the bandages, her voice steady. You're safe now, we've got you. The woman's eyes closed, her breath slow but steady. Sat back, exhaustion pulling at her. But inside her chest something stirred, not pride, not triumph, something quieter. Hope. But hope was dangerous. Because the night wasn't over. The tall man's voice cut through the silence. We need to move. If we found her, others will too. Nodded, we leave in 5. His hands trembled as she packed her kit. She knew he was right. Extraction wasn't survival yet. Survival was getting out alive. And the mountains weren't done with them. Not yet. What did it mean to carry someone through fire and not let go? Asked herself that as the team lifted the operative onto a stretcher, her body fragile, breath faint but steady. The air in the outpost was thick, restless, the silence too loud. His voice was low, controlled. "We move now." No one argued. The tall man and the woman lifted the stretcher's handles, adjusted the bandages one last time, then took her place at the side. The younger soldier followed close, his rifle shaking faintly in his hands. They stepped into the mountains. The sun had begun its slow descent, shadows stretching long across jagged stone. The air was thin, every breath sharp. The path twisted narrow, cliffs yawning below, ridges looming above. Too many places to hide, too many ways to die. His body remembered every sound, every shift of gravel, every breath that wasn't their own. She had walked this walk before too many times, dragging lives with her, whispering lies like prayers. "You're going to make it, just breathe, you're fine." The words echoed in her head as she moved beside the stretcher, her hands steady on the bandages, her eyes scanning every shadow. But the mountains were waiting. The first shot cracked from the ridge. Dust burst at their feet. The tall man swore, dropping low. Another shot followed, slicing air. Then more shouts, echoes, the mountains erupting. Cover barked. They dove behind boulders, the stretcher balanced between stone and dirt. The operative groaned faintly, her body jolting, pressed her hand to her shoulder, steadying her. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Don't you quit now." Bullets screamed overhead. The tall man fired back, sharp bursts echoing. The woman took the other flank, her movements precise, ruthless. The younger soldier froze, panic widening his eyes. His hands trembled on his weapon. His chest tightened. She grabbed his arm, forcing his gaze to hers. "Focus, she needs you steady, we all do." His breath caught, but he nodded, gripping his rifle. She saw his face in his just for a moment. 19, too young, too fragile, but alive. Not this time. The firefight raged, echoing across the cliffs. His voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding. "We move on my signal, ready." Pressed down on the bandages, her voice low to the operative. "Hold on, just a little longer. That's all you have to do." The woman's lips moved faint. "Angel." The word hit like fire. His throat tightened, her scars burning. She wanted to deny it, to bury it, but the truth was already written across her skin. She was Angel, whether she wanted to be or not. Now roared. They moved. The tall man and the woman lifted the stretcher, bullets slicing air as they sprinted for cover, shielded the operative with her body, her heart pounding, every step heavy. The younger soldier fired wildly, but enough to keep the enemy's heads down. Stone shattered around them, dust filled the air, the mountains roared. But they moved. One step, another, a stumble, a gasp, a curse, but they kept moving. When they dove behind another ridge, their breaths came ragged, bodies trembling. The operative was pale but breathing. His hands shook as she pressed the bandages again. The blood seeped slow now, but it was still there, still reminding her of every face she had lost. "Not this time." She whispered again, fierce and desperate. "Stay with me." The firefight ebbed, shouts echoing faintly as the enemy regrouped. But the path was clear now, just long enough. "We push," said, "no more stops." And so they did. Through stone and shadow, through silence and echoes, hours stretched like years. Every step was a battle, every breath was survival. His body screamed with exhaustion, her scars burning, her chest aching. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Because someone's life was in her hands. And that was who she was. Not soldier, not medic, not survivor. Angel. By the time the point came into sight, a clearing cut into the mountains, the faint whine of approaching rotors. Legs felt like lead. The team staggered forward, the stretcher swaying between them. The helicopter swept in low, blades tearing the air, dust swirling. Hands reached out, voices shouted. The stretcher was lifted, the operative pulled aboard. Medics swarmed, taking her from his grip. For a moment stood frozen, her hands empty, her chest hollow. And then, the woman's eyes flickered open one last time. Her lips moved faintly, barely a whisper, but clear enough for to hear. "Thank you." His throat closed, her hands trembled. She nodded once, unable to speak. The rotors roared. The stretcher disappeared inside. The doors slammed shut, and the helicopter lifted, the wind tearing at its clothes, whipping her hair across her face. She watched it rise into the fading light, carrying the woman away, carrying life away. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stood tall, her scars burning, her chest heavy. His voice came beside her, low, steady. "You did it." Shook her head. "We did it." But inside, something shifted. Because for the first time in years, she hadn't lost. She turned away, the mountains stretching silent behind them. The team moved slowly, their bodies weary, their eyes heavy, but they were alive. And so was the woman. That night back at the Strip, sat alone on the edge of the runway. The stars stretched endless above, the wind cold against her skin. Her vest lay beside her, the faded letters catching faint moonlight. "Angel." She traced the letters with her fingers, her scars rough against the fabric. She thought of every face she carried, of the laughter in the diner, of the silence that had once been her armor. And she understood. Scars weren't weakness. They were the proof of fire endured, the cost of carrying lives, the story of someone who stepped into the flames and refused to let go. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Lifted her eyes to the stars, her breath steady, her chest lighter than it had been in years. She wasn't healed, the ghosts would never vanish. But she had carried someone again. And for now, that was enough.